And as we always did before, we like to start on time because we know people have other engagements. And we are honored that you want to spend an hour with New York Law School and the Center for New York City Law. So let me welcome you. Good morning. On behalf of New York Law School and Dean Anthony Crowell, I welcome you to what is the 170th of the City Law Breakfast Series that began in 1994. I am Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and the Director of the Center for New York City Law. We are pleased to welcome so many of you, so many old friends to the breakfast, so many new friends. As I said before, the guest list is well over 500, which indicates a tremendous amount of interest in our guest this morning, Jim Johnson, but also the willingness of people to spend time on important civic issues. Thank you for attending and making City Law Breakfast an important public function. I'd like to thank the financial sponsors who've been so generous and loyal and supporting these breakfasts. First, Consolidated Edison. Second, Verizon. And third, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. I also want to thank the individuals who contribute $20 when they sign up for the breakfast. It's voluntary, but we are enormously appreciative of those individual contributors who we call the Gold Star contributors. Thank you so much for supporting the breakfast and making sure that we can continue this important series. Today's speaker is Jim Johnson, Corporation Counsel of the City of New York. The title of his talk is The Common Good and the Municipal Lawyer, Managing Risks and Building Trust. We've allowed time for, at the end of Jim Johnson's talk, for him to respond to comments or questions following the talk. We encourage you to submit questions or comments at any time during the presentation. We're collecting them, and then they'll be gone over, and questions will be asked and comments stated after the talk. To submit a question or comment, please use the Q&A function of your Zoom screen, and we ask that you identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. Jim Johnson was appointed to his position just 1 year ago in November 2019, but he comes to this position with more than 30 years of very high-level governmental and civic and political experience. Jim Johnson was born in Montclair, New Jersey, graduated from Montclair Kimberly Academy, Harvard College, and Harvard Law School. After law school, he served as an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York, where he rose to be deputy chief of the criminal division. During the Clinton administration, Jim Johnson held senior positions in the Department of the Treasury. He was the Undersecretary of the Treasury, overseeing the Secret Service, Customs Service, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Among many responsibilities in that position, Jim Johnson co-chaired a task force that looked into the wave of arsons at African-American churches that were then occurring throughout the South. Jim Johnson returned to private practice as a partner at Debevoise and Plimpton, where he also found time to chair the important civic organization, the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU. Jim Johnson is active in New Jersey politics and has held important standards for state police related to racial profiling. In 2017, Jim Johnson ran for governor of New Jersey, unfortunately losing in the Democratic primary to the current governor, Phil Murphy. Since arriving at the law department, he has continued the traditions of the law department for hard work, honesty, pride, and dedication to public service, and he has led the department through one of the most difficult years it has ever experienced with courage and good humor. We're delighted to welcome Jim Johnson to the City Law Breakfast Forum. Jim, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. The Common Good and the Municipal Lawyer. I was invited to give this talk more than a year ago, and at the time, the topic of the common good seemed important. It was, after all, the way I had chosen to distill the received values of New York City's storied law department. A year ago, it was important. During a time of surging pandemic, protecting the common good became essential. This morning, I will spend some time introducing some and reminding others of the work of the law department. In doing so, I will try to make it clear what I understand the pursuit of the common good to mean. I intend to give you a practical sense of how that pursuit gives rise to our work on risk, particularly during this time of unprecedented challenge and very real danger. I'm grateful to New York Law School, to Dean Crowell for the invitation to speak to you this morning, and particularly grateful to Professor Sandler, who I know is the driving force, one of the driving forces behind this series, and also for the very, very generous introduction. I'm glad as well, and I join him in thanking all of you for choosing to spend time with us this morning. And before I close, I will have an ask of you. Yes, there will be a call to service and a call to serve with us. As I discuss the common good, I'm not approaching it as a destination to be achieved, like the meeting point or convergence point of a variety of interests. If you think in mathematical terms, imagine a Venn diagram, and it's not that. If your mind moves towards sports analogies and you can't wait for spring to come, the stadiums to be open at some point, and the unmistakable sound of when the ball hits the bat at just the right point, the sweet spot, well, the common good's not that either. And since the law department handles all of the city's litigation with a view toward victory, I'm not talking about achieving solutions where everybody gets what they are claiming. It's definitely not that. At the law department, we protect the city's financial interests, the city's interests in maintaining the executive's ability to manage the city's business, but there are also very important but less material interests that we serve. The city has a very real interest in maintaining trust between citizens and developing a process in which all of our varied interests are treated with dignity, respect, a sense of fairness, a sense of justice. Over the last few weeks, I've had the privilege of interviewing candidates either for their initial judicial appointment or reappointment. And the sitting judges say often that no matter what the outcome, what they want the litigants who appear before them to feel when they leave is that they are treated with respect. One made a point of talking about how he makes sure that he pronounces every person's name the way they want it pronounced. They work hard, they tell us, to understand and do the real work of understanding the cases, applying the law with an open mind, and with compassion. And that, you will hear, is what they use to build trust in the courtroom. Judges help create a container that holds the tension between competing interests, and they serve society's interests in getting what we hope are just and fair resolutions. In the law department, we view ourselves as vital members of our collective efforts to create a community that can hold where necessary and resolve where we can our competing and often hotly contested perspectives. The pursuit of the common good is a dynamic process, not a destination. It will help us build trust within society, which is so necessary to solve our hardest problems. Compassion, fairness, respect, the creation of a container to hold our difference, the pursuit of the common good, that's what's so vital right now. We have lived through so much in the last 9 months that it would be natural for us to want to close the door to as much as possible and not examine it again. But it is worth reflecting for a moment on the challenges we've faced and continue to face as preparation for the next steps in the road ahead. I'm a child of the 60s, and I grew up with the awful math of the Vietnam War every night on the nightly news. Over 10 years, the entire United States suffered about 58,000 war dead. COVID-19 took more than a third of that number in New York City in just 3 months. 5 counties absorbed tremendous losses, more than 20,000 in just a handful of months. And for so many of us, many of my colleagues, many of my friends, this smaller, quieter Thanksgiving was a time to get through, not to celebrate. There were far too many empty chairs. We have been through so much together. The impact in black and brown communities throughout the city was particularly hard. And then last May, we watched, all of us, as George Floyd's breath and then his life was taken away by an officer with a knee on his neck. And that led to both murder charges for the officer, and it created a flashpoint for pointed, hard, and in many respects overdue conversations and efforts at racial reckoning. And if those two things were not enough, the city has now been faced with, as the nation is, with tremendous economic challenges as a result of efforts to slow and reverse the spread of the virus and the efforts of many to keep themselves safe and not going into businesses. Kitchen tables conversations have now turned very often to how do we make ends meet. And law students are worried about the environment in which they are starting their careers. I think it's fair to say that at least within my nearly 60 years, we are roiled in a way that we haven't been before because of the magnitude of this public health crisis. The pursuit of the common good, working to solve problems with compassion and fairness and maintain a sense of community, even at moments of sharp dispute and tension, it could not be a more essential undertaking. For the remainder of this talk, I will focus really not on the broader issues, but on how the law department has been working to tackle them and the tools we've tried to use and employ to serve the common good. There may be lessons that can be applied much more broadly. I tend to think so. The law department itself dates back to 1686 with a lawyer at the time who was known as the Recorder. Over more than 3 centuries, the law department became the largest and remains one of the oldest municipal law offices in this nation. We have more than 900 attorneys and over 800 support professionals, and they serve in 20 locations around the city. And one actually serves outside of the city. Our team of lawyers and legal support professionals does it all. We handle unique questions of administrative law. We represent the city in juvenile prosecutions. We advise on complex real estate transactions. We provide guidance on legislation. In state and federal courts, we defend the city and its employees in tort actions. In contractual matters, employment matters, as well as civil rights disputes. And there is more. Throughout our work runs a bedrock theme. We have many values. We value justice. We value integrity. We value support within the workplace. We tie them together, though, with the notion of serving the common good. This means not only protecting the city's fiscal security, but doing things like using impact litigation to push back against what we viewed as damaging federal policies. And we use our tools to fight environmental threats. Our work means helping to take youth who have been touched by the criminal justice system and serve their best interests, what's going to enable them to grow, and also serve society's best interests in state safety. We try to provide them alternate paths, and it is common for our team to ask the question, not just what this child did, but what happened to this child. Our work involves working closely with agencies and leveraging the data that they have been able to assemble to see how we can reduce the likelihood of public harm. And serving the common good also means increasing our office's efforts, its own efforts, in expanding the range of people that work here, making sure that all who work here feel and are included, and that we get the full benefit of the wide variety of perspectives that enable us to be, I think, wise counsel to this broad, diverse, and complex city. Representing the city means considering each agency's individual institutional interests and advancing those interests as part of the whole. It also means understanding that the short-term and long-term interests of the city as a whole must take precedence. It means using the law and our ethical rules as guideposts in all of our decisions and striking those very important balances. In the last year, I believe we've achieved significant victories for the people of New York. Locally, we succeeded in connection with COVID-19. We focused on a variety of very important matters. We have seen the nation's infection rate spike, and we have also seen that our city has not experienced as much of a spike. And that, we believe, is a result of the restrictions that were put in place during the spring. And many of them were subject to legal challenges. Others made the rules, the mayor made the policy calls, and it fell to us to defend those calls in court. So we made our contribution to keeping the city safer, as all have gathered together on this team to help keep our city safer. Our transactional lawyers assisted the city with a range of emergency procurement contracts because first responders and hospitals needed PPE, they needed important medical supplies. But our work didn't stop there. We settled the lawsuit that was generated here against Verizon. And as a result of that settlement, at least 500,000 homes will have access to broadband. And those would include homes that have the worst access to internet. And we have all seen how important having that access is and how important being connected is to doing schoolwork, to being able to participate in the workforce, to be able to remain in touch with family members. On the national level, we emerged victorious in the U.S. Supreme Court's first major gun case. We protected the right of the city to set its own gun safety policy. This has been and will continue to be vital as we and the city move forward and continues its focus on public safety. The election was of vital concern, and this department worked to ensure that the Postal Service was adequately staffed and well-positioned to carry forward the important task of mail-in ballots, even as the very president was working to restrict its operations. We also joined with other municipalities and other jurisdictions in obtaining a federal court order that blocked an effort to divert, and then this was the effort by the Department of Education, to divert millions in federal emergency pandemic relief that was intended for public schools to other uses. And these successes are part of a complement of thousands of lawsuits, claims, and transactional matters that our attorneys handle every single day. Which brings me to the work on risk. Ideally, we would want to have fewer cases. Part of the reason for that, of course, is to save taxpayer dollars. But the other part, and I think a very important part of that, is that whenever the city, through any of its agents, causes harm, and the courts find that there's been damage, that represents an instance where the compact between the government and it may be an individual or a group of individuals that are governed gets frayed, tested, torn apart. And the legal process is what either knits it back together or at least makes amends. But one thing that is really important is that we do what we can to avoid it. And the pandemic brought into very high relief the importance of our work on risk and its bearing on trust and moving forward in these very, very challenging times. Part of what risk involved, imposed by COVID-19, was enterprise risk. And part of it was, and the most vital part of it, was the societal risk. Clearly with, as I mentioned before, death and disease really raging throughout the city. During the first weeks of the crisis, we were able to move to remote work. And we watched as healthcare professionals and first responders took on the task of saving lives at great personal risk. And sometimes they paid, in Lincoln's phrase, the last full measure of devotion. They were clearly in service of the common good, and they remain so. And one of the best ways we can honor them is actually to follow their example. Some of us would not actually be here at all today without their work. Our role during the early days was to be support teams, was to provide our city's leadership, provide the mayor and his core team, and those on the front line with the legal support for their actions, for their decisions, and also to help them get the essential tools they needed to carry out this vital job. We understood our roles and continue to understand our roles to support the important members and decisions of Mayor de Blasio's team. But to do that, one of the key things we had to do was to keep functioning. That meant developing protocols for keeping people safe in the office in the first days of the crisis, and then keeping our teams functioning and connected when it became clear that we all had to work remotely. It also meant developing in real time the trust necessary to achieve a broad level of collaboration with city agencies, the courts, our colleagues in the bar, and with my predecessors as corporation counsel who convened in what may have been the only time, and definitely a rare time, as a council of wise elders as we worked through the crisis and made themselves available to us to raise core questions and get the benefits of their collective insight. One of the things that this period left me with was a profound appreciation of the women and the men who have elected to serve city government, who don't typically make the headlines, but serve such vital and important functions. In his farewell speech, President Obama discussed the call to serve, public service, as having one key goal: to make people's lives better. And the quiet story of people who will say, "I was just doing my job," is one of the most heartening of a dark, dark period. Internally, we have been focusing on our own workforce, ensuring that everyone at the law department is healthy, motivated, and informed. Early in the pandemic, this involved making health experts available to answer staff questions, developing and implementing cleaning and social distancing protocols, and taking other workplace measures. As the pandemic expanded and we moved remotely, we focused on communication, technology, and even better and more information. We used our emergency messaging platforms to keep staff informed on a daily basis. We launched a new intranet site and a new team to staff it that we called A Healthy Distance. So lawyers and support professionals could connect, get news, bond, unite, understand that there was an institutionalized place to receive and be understood with compassion. We made greater use of EAP services because our enterprise was not just the computers. Our enterprise is far more than our cases. Our enterprise at the end of the day and the beginning of the day is our people. And working to deal with and support them as they work through this crisis was vital. It was both the right thing to do and it's the smart thing to do. It better enables us to serve the city better. We used a variety of tools, and like many of you, we have probably seen more than enough Zoom meetings, but we are figuring out ways to make them better because we can see Zoom meetings throughout the foreseeable future. And that's internal. As I mentioned, there's enterprise risk, and part of it was the enterprise of keeping this organization going and serving the city. But the citywide enterprise was also under threat because the same questions that we were facing on a small level were being faced on a much larger level, and sometimes with extraordinary great severity in terms of the challenges that essential workers had to undertake as they came into the office to perform tasks, and came into the workspace to perform tasks that could not be performed remotely. And the cost to them in certain areas became like the cost to our first responders and to medical personnel. Much higher levels of illness and of death. It has been a time in which the city has been sorely tested. So what we did was believing that collaboration and working together was essential for us to respond to the crisis without overloading our systems, was that we started to form teams. We brought all of the general counsels of all the agencies, not just mayoral agencies, but all of the agencies in the city, to form essentially a weekly meeting of a virtual law firm that came together, that discussed issues in an organized way, highlighted problems, flagged issues that ended up with us creating essentially a handbook with pocket parts added week by week by week of the hard issues, the answers to those questions, and then putting together where we couldn't come up with answers to the questions, teams to work with City Hall and elsewhere to develop appropriate responses that helped us minimize the risk to the ongoing operation of the city. We took lessons from that about the benefits of collaboration. We saw in real time how important it was for us to be nimble and to learn and practice trusting each other so that we could respond to the ever-growing needs of the city and do that in a way that was nimble and accurate and sustainable. And that leads me to the discussion of the broader societal risks and the lessons that we've learned from COVID-19 and elsewhere. COVID-19 represents the most urgent and compelling story in our effort to develop a better response to risk management. And lessons we have learned there, we're working to apply more broadly. Risk management, put simply, really involves three core concepts. One, identification, what could go wrong. Two, assessment, how likely can it go wrong. And three, mitigation, what can we do to ratchet it back. So identifying things that we as a city do, which create risk and liability for us, for our organization, and for the people that we serve. That's identification. Assessment, evaluating and prioritizing these risks to understand how significant they are, who they affect, who can address them, and whether there's an additional need for added time or resources to address them now, or whether we don't need to add additional resources and just can reconfigure what we have to address them in an effective way. And lastly is mitigation, taking steps to control, reduce, eliminate, and prevent the risks in a lasting and systemic way. Lasting and systemic. It goes without saying that risk management is or should be a vital component to any organization. It is particularly important to large organizations that not only carry large financial liabilities, but also whose core function is to help and support people. When I was at Treasury, I oversaw about a third of federal law enforcement. And my team very early on heard me say, and say it often, I want to identify issues before they become problems. Let's deal with problems before they become crises. And when the crises come, and they always will, we will have fewer to deal with and hopefully a little bit more space to deal with them thoughtfully and, one would hope, wisely. There may be no better example of such an entity than such an important organization than the City of New York, and why risks ought to be focused upon. If one of our chief goals is making people's lives better, and it is, one of the first things we must do is not make them worse. It's both financially smart, but it's also, we believe, wise. It's part of our compact with our citizens. People are much more likely to trust a government that is actively seeking ways to make their lives better and is seen to be seeking ways to make their lives better and safer. And that engenders trust, and trust is surely what we need as we tackle the difficult challenges ahead of us. One of our challenges is in economics, and in fiscal year 2017, the payout of the city was about $750 million. Last year was lower, but in times of significant budget challenges, tremendous budget challenges, we should be trying to do much better. Risk management in service of the common good is actually another way of saying the government is showing that in a profound way it cares about its citizens. Managing risk can involve something very simple like record-keeping changes, or something major like substantial policy and training changes, or even significant infrastructure planning. In city government, the law department is well positioned to take an active role in helping manage the city's risk profile. Why is the law department so well positioned? Well, through our litigation, our counseling, and transactional work, the law department gathers a robust amount of information regarding risk and liability exposure. Analysis of that information is critical to the identification and mitigation of risk. The law department also is a central legal hub connected to all agencies on matters of risk and liability. We can convene the right players and facilitate the right discussions around risk management. This allows us to drill deep into single issues with a single agency, but also helps organize cross-agency reviews of common issues. In my very first day on the job, the importance of risk was essentially as clear as the window to my right, because my desk is situated with a clear view of what used to be the site of the Twin Towers. And my very first briefings involved the stories about what to do in the case of emergency. Many of our lawyers were here when the towers fell. And many ended up being part of both the compassionate response and the legal response to the city's tremendous loss. So that issue was impressed upon me from day one. And it turns out from that moment, around that moment, in 2001 and 2002, the risk initiative in the department actually had its grounding. The formal citywide risk management program started in the wake of of the World Trade Center disaster, 9/11, and really got started in earnest in 2002. This was a time when the city had 40,000 personal injury actions pending against it. At the time, the mission of the risk management group was fourfold. One, to identify lessons learned in litigation and to share them with the relevant agencies, and this was just in tort matters. Two, preserve evidence for defense of litigation that was brought against the city. Three, mitigate risk through the review of contracts and agreements and to identify fraud. That's where the mission began. As part of its initial operational plan, the risk group began meeting with the city's top 7 agencies involved in litigation, and we built the foundation of what has become a very robust interagency and interdisciplinary approach to risk management. Early risk initiatives included simple changes like enhancing documentation of safety measures, so we know what was done and when repairs would need to be made. Identifying collaborative training practices so that law and the affected agencies were working and training together. And sometimes they were something really simple, like providing pails of sand to remediate oil spills in the garages of the fleet of many cars, trucks, and buses that the city maintains. Each agency also began internal discussions regarding operations that featured prominently in our litigation matters. I just want to talk about one, and that's at the Department of Transportation. Early on, the Department of Transportation put together a very robust risk management program for the Staten Island ferry operations. While DOT had always been mindful and responsive to issues that arose on the ferries, they undertook a much more comprehensive and systematic program that was devoted to addressing issues before they became problems, an approach that's dear to my heart. Due to existing federal law governing injury to seamen, the city had been exposed to liability associated with its ferry operations beyond workers' compensation and common law tort liability. Under the Jones Act, the city was liable for additional damages to the extent a seaman was injured in the course of his or her duties. That meant tremendous liability, and also, because of the nature of the employees and the training involved, had an impact on the employees' lives and an impact on the service that was provided. After adoption of risk program for ferry operations, the cases brought and the number of injuries sustained have almost been entirely eliminated. We reduced risks to our employees, we reduced risks to our citizens, and we reduced the injury-related causes of a loss of service. The goal of having a risk team and the value of that goal became so very clear in connection with the ferry operations. But it also was applied to many other operations and continues to be, to the Parks Department, and also to looking at a variety of transactions that the city has been engaged in. When I joined the law department, I saw the importance of this work, and I also saw an opportunity to expand it. I saw how we can take the work of this one team and weave risk management into the fabric of the law department across all divisions. And that we have done, but we've done more than that. We've taken this approach and we've made it a truly interagency approach. The goal is to weave this approach into the fabric of how the city governs itself. So our current initiatives are an effort to fulfill this broader vision. This past year, we focused our energy on a few specific risk management initiatives, all with room for growth. I just want to talk about a handful because I do want to leave time for questions. We've created a risk liaison program with our client and corresponding agencies. We've created a risk liaison program within our divisions. We've created a risk steering committee with our client and corresponding agencies. And we've created agency counsel teams. And what that means is that while we have a core group that's focused on risk, and this is the risk liaison program, while we have a core group that's focused on risk, every single division has a liaison to that. And so we have a window both into the work of the risk group, but also a window into the works of the agencies. And this is one of the lessons that came out of windows of the divisions. And this is one of the lessons that came out of our response to COVID-19. We saw the tremendous value in establishing linkages and tearing down silos and actually facilitating communication and joint problem solving. And that's within the law department. Externally, we have brought together a team of both technical efforts and operational, senior operational leaders to form an interagency team that is focused on risk and how we identify potential operational problems, how we use data to get ahead and actually forecast where problems might arise and get ahead of that and fix it before it becomes a larger problem for the city. The steering committee has been meeting, and this was delayed somewhat by COVID-19, to talk about how we can reduce the city's risk profile. And we have several cross-agency projects that are underway, and we'll be able to talk about them more, I think, in the coming months. And then we borrowed a concept from private sector law firms, creating agency counsel teams initially for the agencies that have either the largest number of cases, the largest number of claims, damage claims or judgments against them, or otherwise have a very strong public-facing profile. And we've created interdisciplinary teams to support those agencies, to share information so that we understand even more deeply the business and the operations of our agencies, and that we can do two things. One, work with them to identify issues before they become problems. And that often means using the cases individually, pulling them together to see whether or not there are actually patterns that are emerging so that problematic patterns don't become outsized crises. And that's one thing that these teams will be doing. But the other is we need to be in the best possible position to defend the city and the judgments that have been made in court, and make sure that our teams form a effective and open and efficient pipeline with the agencies so that the information flow is at the top level, and we as the lawyers for the city are in the very best position to defend the city. We do these things because they are really part of the core of this department. We do these things because it is important for us to get our arms really around the risk. Yes, to save money, but also to make sure that we are adding to public trust, not taking away from it. And as we use a dynamic process of trying to achieve and serve the common good, as we take the example of the men and women who actually served at greatest danger in service of a very high principle, I believe that we are going to contribute mightily to leaving a city better off in many respects, even as it struggles through the challenges that face us right now. And with that, I will lead you with one thing and then an ask. in a number of organizations, and definitely a number of cities, there's a core principle, and it dates back to one of our earliest democracies, that is Athens. And it is the idea of each citizen's pledge. The Athenian pledge, which could go right beside our commitment to the common good, says this: we will never bring disgrace in this our city by an act of dishonesty or cowardice. We will fight for the ideals and sacred things of the city, both alone and with the many. We will revere and obey the city's laws, and will do our best to incite a like reverence and respect in those above us who are prone to annul them or set them to naught. We will strive unceasingly to quicken the public sense of civic duty. Thus, in all these ways, we will transmit this city not only, not less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. That's what we do when we serve the common good. And in a time of great need, there are so many ways to serve. Find one way to serve the kind of good. Find many. We're in a public health crisis with collateral consequences, one of which is the really shrinkage of our blood supply. And Mayor de Blasio highlighted that as our blood supplies have run low, that it's very important for all of us, if we can, to do that hard thing and contribute blood. I raise that in part because perhaps we lawyers are known for trying to get blood from a stone, and now it's time to actually contribute some blood of our own. The important thing is to answer that call. And lawyers who are listening, we all have pro bono commitments. Consider joining the law department and providing some pro bono service for many of our cases, and there will be more coming that have come out of COVID-19 that are in the pipeline in any event, whether or not they're coming out of the responses to COVID-19. We have at least 9 law firms that have actually volunteered their services already. There will be a need for more, and we would appreciate your stepping forward to offer and join with us. And finally, law students should consider a career with us. It is an extraordinary opportunity to make a contribution to our city, to leave it greater than it was ever transmitted to us. We are in a hard time, and the best way through is together. Join with us as we advance the common good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was really very inspiring, particularly that last challenge to us, and it's a challenge to everybody. Questions and comments have been collected by Brian Kasuba, the Associate Director of the Center for New York City Law. And we thank him and the staff of the Center and of the Law School for their terrific work in putting together these breakfasts. I'm going to ask him to ask questions, but we're going to also have a little time. We'll have Dean Anthony Crowell and Jim Johnson with a colloquy at the end as well. So Brian, I give it to you.
Thank you, Ross. So we do have a few questions. I do see that a couple of people use the virtual hand raise. Please type your questions in the Q&A function. That's where we will pull them from to ask the Court Counsel. So we have a couple of questions. So the first question coming through is from Kurt Steinhaus, General Counsel for Board of Standards and Appeals. And he wants to know, what has been the most rewarding part about serving New York City thus far?
Wow, it's a long list, so I'll try to focus at least thematically. A couple of weeks ago, after I passed my first anniversary in the job, someone said to me, if you knew what was going to happen, would you still have taken the job on? And my answer is absolutely yes. I cannot imagine a time. I grew up in a family of public servants, and I couldn't imagine a time in which the city and this nation, and really globally, we were under such huge challenge where I would want to be sitting on the sidelines and kibitzing. and the chance to work with this talented group of people who, you know, my main job in coming in has been not to mess up, because they are talented, they work well together, they exemplify every day the spirit of collaboration. I would have loved to and have loved to have that opportunity. But then just to see the nobility in many of the people that serve this city has been on a daily basis inspiring. And so it's not one particular thing, but this work at this time. I can't say it's always been enjoyable, but it has been deeply, deeply meaningful.
We have another question from Reed Schneider. How does risk management process apply to the city's tax administration and its resolving tax litigation?
So I can say at this stage, that has not been our focus. We have been focused on much more operational matters, but it is definitely going to be a space where we will move to over time. So I would say on that one, stay tuned.
That I'm going to actually turn it over to Dean Anthony Crowell for some comments and questions. Dean Crowell?
So much, Brian. I really appreciate that. And I will say that this was such a wonderful talk today, Jim. Your talk was so thoughtful and generous in helping our audience better understand the complexity of the law department as a law firm, a major employer that clearly, and from my own experience as a former assistant corporation counsel, values culture not only for its lawyers, but its support professionals, and as a manager of the city's overall legal operation, and thus really a steward for the public good, as you say. So let me ask you this question as we end today's program. And I want to say that you spoke in my class over the summer, and you were really inspirational to the students. And to this day, they still talk about that and what a special moment it was. And we started to talk about this question, and I still grapple. I'm still trying to grapple with it. So I want to look forward a little bit and ask you this. How do we as a city manage our risks, but also take risks in designing really effective strategies to facilitate social justice and racial equity, and to manage our choices for a post-COVID economic recovery? And let me just add to that. How do we do it during what will be, no doubt, a turbulent year, given the citywide election and the implementation of a complex new voting system?
Well, one of the things that there is the idea of taking risks. And anytime you say, let's take some risks here, there is at least a part of our reptilian brain that says danger, all right? And we get into a fight or flight. I like to think about it as trying something new. Let's make this new effort. I think the toughest words in any sort of institution, particularly a government bureaucracy, is we've always done it this way. And if you've always done something and your circumstances has changed, you've basically embarked on an area that's going to lead to some dysfunction. It may be huge dysfunction, it may be a minor irritant, but you're going to end up with some dysfunction. And so my perspective is, let's continue to interrogate the problems, understand them, understand the underpinnings of it, and then take reasonable steps forward. I believe it was the management theorist Deming who coined the phrase plan, do, check, act. Before we do that, we need to understand. So within the law department, we've created a group that is focused on innovation and strategy. We're just now standing that group up. One of the things that they're doing is they will be together understanding systems thinking and reviewing a book called Systems Thinking for Social Change. The idea is you need to understand, as I mentioned, we bring affirmative litigation, and you need to understand the change that you want to see first before you embark on an action. And so we'll have a team of probably 10 to 15 lawyers and support staff that will be looking both at our own internal operations, but other things that are happening in the city, and thinking about how we can use the tools that we have, because it doesn't look like we're going to get more tools, but use the tools that we have to have a better and more precise understanding of the problems that we're confronting, and develop strategies that are much more tightly tailored to get the results that we want to achieve.
How do you scale that across the government? You know, you talk about, so we'll talk about an enterprise solution. We'll talk about the government as an enterprise. How do you scale some of that? And I'm a big believer, you know, I came out of the law department. I was the mayor's counsel for a number of years. Now I'm at the law school, but I'm a big believer that the law department is one of the most important agencies, because you have the ability to truly drive change. You and OMB have the ability to truly drive change. How do you scale something like you just described?
Well, so first off, we support the change that others want to see in effect, and we help them sort of see and understand issues and problems and come forward with solutions. You know, I didn't come into the job. There were values that I brought into the job, but I didn't have a change agenda. That is something that comes from City Hall, that comes ultimately from the mayor and City Council. But the way to do it within this organization and others is to create a culture of learning together. So I'll give you an example. We are surrounded by the built environment. It shapes how we move through the city. It shapes how we feel in different parts of the city. It even shapes, it can shape our health in the city. And we have a building code that's designed to address that. We have all sorts of other codes that are designed to address the issues of look and feel. There's now science, a lot of science behind that. And I think that the law department, and what I've tried to do is, when things like that come to my attention, then I share it with the person who's the thought leader in that particular area, say with respect to building design, working with the Department of Planning, with the Planning Commission rather, and just having discussions where we are thinking through problems together without necessarily a particular project in mind, but we're learning together. And so for me, the law department's role should be much more of a thought partner as people elsewhere are trying to drive change. And we should be a place where we can come forward with solutions and make it easier to get over the hump of, okay, what are the next steps here? And that's the way I envision the job and the role. Less of a change driver than more of a change facilitator and a thought partner.
Understood. I think of the law department as a change facilitator, you know, because government is predicated on law. It establishes the law, it enforces and implements the law. The law department has an extraordinary amount of power to shape outcomes, and I guess that's where my question derives from. But how do you work across the agency these days to really have everyone who's a law department employee be a stakeholder in that? The attorneys, but also the support professionals. And you have such a broad array of support professionals who do such a wide variety of things. And I know that's been an important thing for you, to empower them and really to give them that ownership over outcomes. So we'd love to hear a little bit of your thought on that.
Sure. Well, I think I may have mentioned this summer that I am the son of my mom. At one stage was a secretary in a law firm, and my first job was in the mailroom at the law firm. She ultimately, and at the time she could not have gone to, she actually hadn't gone to college, finished college, and couldn't go to law school. But she ultimately continued her schooling and got a PhD and became a professor, an adjunct professor at two of New Jersey's universities. And so my perspective is, and I grew up with the perspective, is that everybody has a contribution to make. And if you give them the tools, you may be dazzled by the nature of that contribution. Putting it in concrete terms in the law department, we have, we've not only made it very clear as a matter of how we communicate the importance of the entire members of this team, but we have organized our institution-wide committees so that they have both legal support professors and lawyers on those committees. Things like the Innovation and Strategy Council that I just discussed, our diversity committee, a variety of our committees now are split or will be pretty close to evenly between legal support professionals and our lawyers. And as we are operating under resources that will become less constrained, more constrained rather than less, more than likely in the future, working together as teams and doing the better job of that is core to our being able to carry forward this mission, and getting the maximum out of contribution out of everyone enables the work to be fulfilling for everyone, and I think makes us even more impactful.
One of the things that's been on my mind lately, especially since the election, and what you just said makes me so happy and hopeful, at least for New York City government, is a lot of my colleagues and I are discussing the Justice Department and the loss of talent that we have seen, that we've witnessed. Many of our friends and colleagues who've worked within are now in private practice or in other public service roles in state or local government. And one of the things I've always admired about the law department, and that I will say is a beautiful thing, is its stability. You have such a broad array of very long-time public servants who have been dedicated not just to effective municipal lawyering, but they're support professionals. They're government managers. They're stewards of that public good. And I think what you're describing is a culture that will sustain that into the future. And I really admire that. I think it's important. And while I think we can all agree that change is good and that leadership has dynamics to it, stability is also important, because to achieve anything, you need to have that deep bench of knowledge, strength, and commitment. So it sounds like part of this newer management strategy will allow the agency to grow, but also to sustain what's been among its greatest strengths for decades upon decades. So
In any growth situation, you should always try to start with what's strong, and very often people come in, and even before they've understood it, they try to figure out what's wrong and fix it. And you start with what's strong, not with what's wrong, and you find out that the strength actually will overcome a lot of what the challenges might be.
And maybe that's a good message.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good message for us to end on, about sort of the future of the city. Start with what's strong, not with what's wrong, and you can address with what's wrong through that. Playing to strengths and coming together in that box, that common box of differences, that where everything gets reconciled. I appreciated that you said that. So this has been so wonderful. I always enjoy talking to you, and I'm I'm a huge admirer of what you're doing, especially, I mean, you have one of the toughest jobs in public service anywhere, and now you're doing it during a pandemic and during a time of such difficult social justice issues, difficult economic issues. You couldn't be confronting more headwinds, but you're doing it with incredible grace and incredible strategy. So thank you so much for what you do for the people of the city of New York. We are all grateful.
You're welcome. And fortunately, it's not me by myself at all. I'm on deck, but it is a ship that is running with a really great crew.
It starts at the top. You are clearly enabling a culture that that has all stakeholders working in the right direction with you. So thank you so much.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This will end the breakfast. Thank you for a wonderful breakfast and for a very interesting colloquy at the end. Thank you so much. And we will be, our next breakfast will be next year. We welcome you then. Bye-bye.
Take care.